Cultivating the ground means plowing, tilling, and nurturing seeds until their roots are deep, secure, and growing into a plant that will eventually thrive.
We are cultivators too, growing God's kingdom when our roots are planted firmly in the truths of God.
Knowing our specific mission, calling, and vision, we plant seeds all around us, waiting patiently for the fruit to be harvested at just the right time, people brought to eternal life.
What joy awaits both the planter and the harvester alike.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. It's good to see you this morning. My name's Jeremy, one of the pastors here. I know that most of you know that, but some of you might be guests. And if you are, and I haven't met you yet, I'd love to meet you after our service today. This January is actually a great time for you to visit and get to know NorthPoint a little bit, because we've been looking at our mission as a church, like what God has called us to be and to do as a church. And we've been looking at this from Colossians chapter 1. So if you've got a Bible, take it and turn to Colossians 1. If you don't have a Bible, there's some in front of you. It's on page 954. And what we started here was with the mission of Jesus, the mission that he has called us to, that he has called really all churches to. And we saw from Colossians 1 that God has chosen a people that have put their faith in his life, death, and resurrection, and he's called us his church or his body. He's called us the Lord's people. And we said this, like, knowing people is important. It's important that you know people. A lot of times, like in your career, you advance by your networks and by the people you know, right? But there's no greater person to know than the God who created the entire universe. And that God has called you his people. He's called us his church. He's put us together in a family, and he's given us a mission to do. And so he gives us an identity as his own people, but he says, I've got a mission. We're going to do something together. And Paul began to lay out what that mission of Jesus is. In Colossians 1, in verse 29, Paul gets to the heart of it where he says, he is the one we proclaim. Jesus is the one that we proclaim. So the message about Jesus is what we're all about, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom so that we may present everybody mature in Christ. So the mission of Jesus is the message about his life, death, and resurrection, and then growing to maturity in him. And so this is as his people, this is our one thing. This is the one thing that we are all about. And if you remember, I used this illustration of, bear with me, it's just like one more week and then we'll be done talking about burgers. But we talked about In-N-Out, right? And I told you a couple of weeks ago that I was going down to Houston, and this is on my agenda, and I know where the closest In-N-Out to the airport is, and I'm gonna go there right away when I land. And I actually lied to you, because when I got to Houston, I didn't feel very well, and I thought, at 8:30 at night, the best meal is probably not a double-double from In-N-Out. So I didn't get it when I first went down there, but I did get it before I left. This is my actual picture of the double-double. And I'm going to be honest with you, it was kind of disappointing, actually. I don't know if Texans don't know how to make the double-doubles, but maybe you got to go to California for it. I don't know. Slightly disappointing, but overall, In-N-Out is killing it with their one thing. They do one thing. They do a double-double cheeseburger with a special sauce, and they've been very successful as a franchise by focusing on their one thing. Our one thing as followers of Jesus is his mission, the message about him and growing to maturity in him, because he's the one that saved us. Jesus is the one that has given us life. Not only did he create the universe, but he called us into his family, and he has shown us what life is all about. And everything we need is found in Jesus Christ, and that Jesus has called you his own and made you a part of his family. This is why we're all about him. That was what we did in the first week. The second week, then, we looked at our specific calling as a church. That is to say, while the mission of Jesus for every church is really his message and maturity in him, each individual church has a responsibility, I think, to take that mission and articulate it in a way that makes sense in their day, in their time, in their culture, with the needs and the issues that they're seeking to address. And so we use this illustration of houses. Remember this? That if you were to travel around the world, you would see various types of homes. Now, the purpose of a home is the same. It provides shelter. It's a dwelling place. You might raise a family there. You sleep there. You cook meals there. You eat. You do life together in a home. So every home has the same intended purpose or mission, we might say, but all these homes look different. Different structures a little bit, different things are used to make them, different colors, different textures. The layouts on the inside would be a little bit different. Same mission, but lots of differences to them. And in the same way, the mission that Jesus has for us at NorthPoint, there's some uniqueness to it, right? And there's a way that we can articulate that mission in a way that just makes sense in our day and in our culture. And so at NorthPoint, here's the mission, the specific mission, the calling that Jesus has for us as a church. We say it this way, that our mission is to cultivate communities of grace and truth. When we see Jesus, and we're supposed to be all about him in John chapter 1, we see a God who is filled with grace and truth. That's what Jesus looks like. So we want to be a people that are filled with the grace and truth of Jesus and taking that grace and truth to the world in which we live, cultivating communities filled with grace and truth in three ways. By, these are our values, looking to Jesus, always the number one value. Embracing community, meaning we're going to do this in relationships with each other. So that when God calls you into his family or you come to trust in Jesus, he doesn't set us up all on our own individual islands for a personal relationship with him. He does have a personal relationship with you, but he puts you into a church, into his body, into the Lord's people, plural, into a family, right? And so we understand from scriptures that our Christianity is best lived out in community. In fact, in one sense, you could say it's only lived out in community, in relationships with other followers of Jesus, and that's really a blessed thing. And then our third value is engaging culture. So we're looking to Jesus together in community, and we're seeking to engage our culture, which meaning both your workplace and your school and your neighborhood and your families and the community in which we live. We're looking around and saying, how do we help bring other people into the grace and the truth of Jesus Christ, both here and also around the world. That's our mission. Those are our values. Now, a lot of those things happen as we gather here together on Sunday mornings. Remember, we said the church is a called out assembly, a called out gathering. That's what that Greek word means. And so this is what we do here to worship Jesus and to look to him and to sing to him and to grow in him. But it's more than that, right? And so we seek to get you into community groups or into Bible studies, into serving with the gifts that you have to engage in relationships with others outside of this Sunday morning time that we have. And we try to get you thinking about your neighbors and your classmates and the communities in which you live, to care about the people that are there, to engage culture in those ways. So that this mission that Jesus has given to us as a church is not so much about a program. It's not so much about the institution and some program that we are running. It's more so about you receiving and living in the grace and truth of Jesus so that you begin to embody his grace and truth in all the spheres of influence you have and in all the ways that you live life and all the circles that you run in. So it's not just we go to church and we do our God thing there. It's that we come here to get filled up with the grace and truth of Jesus so that as we live our lives in this world, his grace and truth comes out of us. And it is who we are. So not so much a program, but something that we embody, something that we are. Another way you could say it is it just becomes our culture. Jesus' grace and truth is in our DNA. That's who we are, and that's what we do. Now, if we did those two things on the first 2 weeks, his mission, our specific calling, and the mission that we have specifically as a church, last week we looked at what that means for global missions, for taking the message of Jesus like overseas and crossing geographical boundaries to be able to do that. And Sean Cooper, we had a special speaker here last week who did a great job, taking us through the Great Commission passages, right? And showing us that for NorthPoint, what it looks like to cultivate communities of grace and truth means that we're seeking to plant churches among unreached people groups. We're seeking to plant communities of grace and truth in parts of the world where people have never heard the name of Jesus before, and they don't have a Bible, and they don't have a Christian witness at all. And so we try to present that to you, recognizing most of you are not going to leave this place and go overseas and do that, but you're going to pray for those missionaries, and you're going to support those missionaries, and you're going to get to know them, and you're going to give to those missionaries. So we're going to be a sending church that is a part of God's mission globally. So if those are the first 3 weeks of this, then where does that leave us at? What do we have left to do? Well, today, I want to finish up this series by looking at our strategy right here in the Des Moines Metro, in the places in which you and I live. So if the first couple weeks are like, what's the mission and why is that the mission? The last 2 weeks are the how. How do we do that mission? How do we do it globally last week and now today? How do we do that globally? What does that look like to cultivate communities of grace and truth by looking to Jesus, embracing community, and engaging culture right here? Well, I want to look at two passages to help frame this for us. And they show us something that is either explicitly stated or that is implied throughout the entire New Testament when it comes to the strategy that Jesus wants us to have for fulfilling his mission. And what we find from these passages and really all throughout the New Testament is this, that the strategy that Jesus has for us is concerned with both evangelism and discipleship. Now, by evangelism, what I mean is sharing the gospel message of Jesus with people so that people will say, okay, either no, I don't believe that, or yes, I believe that and I want to follow Jesus. So that's what I mean by evangelism, sharing the grace and truth of Jesus with others and inviting them into a relationship with him. And by discipleship, I mean people that say, yes, I've come in by the grace of Jesus and I want to grow in the grace of Jesus. I want to grow to understand his truth more. I want to mature in the relationship with him. And I put a couple of pairs of words up here that all actually mean the same thing, evangelism and discipleship. Or you might say externally growing and internally growing. We're concerned with numerical growth, more people coming to trust Jesus, and growing in depth, growing spiritually, or more followers of Jesus and mature followers of Jesus Christ. I want you to see this from the scriptures. So if you're in Colossians chapter 1, we see this verse from this passage that we've been looking at. The Apostle Paul is like the church planner, missionary of the New Testament, right? Kind of our primary one. There was a number of others, but he's a primary one. Wrote a lot of the New Testament. He's writing to this church that existed in the town of Colossae. I've told you before, he has not personally met these Christians because he didn't plant this church, but he's establishing a relationship with them. And notice what he says to them in Colossians 1 and verse 3. He says, we always thank God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, when we pray for you, because we've heard about your faith in Jesus Christ. And we've heard about the love you have for all of God's people. That's a faith and love that springs from the hope that's stored up for you in heaven, and about which you have already heard in the true message of the gospel that has come to you. So in other words, the gospel message came to you because somebody, we might say, evangelized you. They shared with you the good news about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, and you received that message, or in other words, you believed in that message. And then what happened? Well, verse 6, in the same way, that gospel, it's bearing fruit and growing throughout the whole world, just as it has been doing among you since the day you heard it and you truly understood God's grace. So in other words, the gospel message came to you, you believed, you received that gospel message, and now you're growing in it. And it's bearing fruit in your other relationships you have in the same way that Paul, I'm out sharing the gospel with people and they're believing it and then they're growing and love is coming out of that. And there is hope that results from that. Growth, right? So belief in the gospel and then growing in the gospel. In fact, Paul goes on to talk about their growth in verse 9. And so he says this, for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we haven't stopped praying for you. Well, what's Paul praying for them? We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so you can live a life that is worthy of the Lord and please him in every way. Do you see here this embodiment of grace and truth, right? That you would know what God wants for you, you would understand his will, and it would come out in the lives that you live. So not just a program that you do, but you believe the gospel, you've trusted, more of you have come in, and you're growing in the grace of God. You're growing in the knowledge of Jesus Christ, and that is expanding and growing more and more and more. In fact, in verse 28, when Paul got to the heart of Jesus' mission, we remind ourselves of that again. Jesus is the one we proclaim. Jesus is the one we share with people. We evangelize them, admonishing them when they believe and teaching them with all wisdom so that each person would become mature in Jesus Christ. Evangelism and discipleship. That they would believe and that they would grow in Jesus Christ. So spiritual growth, you see, man, that is of great concern to Paul. But not just that the people that are already believers would grow, but that more people would come to trust in Jesus Christ and grow in him. In fact, Paul gets at that in Colossians chapter 4. So if you get your finger there, just turn over maybe a page to the final chapter here where Paul's going to give some last admonitions to the church at Colossae. And you notice what he says to them in Colossians 4 and verse 2. He's closing up and he's like, I only got a few things left to say to you. Here's what's really important, verse 2. Devote yourselves to prayer. Be watchful and be thankful. Grow. Grow in communicating with God. Learn to listen to him. Learn to talk to him. You've got to grow spiritually. God has great things for you if you listen to him and you hear from him. And verse 3, and pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ for which I'm in chains. Paul's in prison when he's writing this letter. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. So he's like, you really got to grow. And one of the primary ways you grow is through praying and growing in this relationship with God who loves you and is for you, who says, I am your Father. And here's one of the main things I want you to pray. Pray that I will be effective in my evangelism. Pray that the gospel would be effective as I share it with other people, that more people would come to believe in Jesus. And then he moves from this to, don't only pray for me that I would be effective in that, but notice what he says then in verse number 5. You also, you be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Who are outsiders? Non-believers. People that haven't believed the gospel message. And he says, I want you to think about your relationships with them and how you interact with them. Make the most of every opportunity you have with them. Verse 6, let your conversations with them be always full of grace. I love that. Let your conversations with outsiders who don't yet believe in Jesus be full of, don't tell me what to do. Don't treat me that way. These are my rights. Don't tread on me. No, let it be full of grace towards them. Be wise. Make the most of your opportunities. Let your conversation be filled with grace. Let it be seasoned with salt so that you can know how to answer everyone. So Paul is greatly concerned that followers of Jesus would grow, would mature, would become deeper disciples. And what is one of the primary ways we grow and we mature in Jesus? In our witness to the world. In our thinking about more people coming to trust in Jesus Christ, the people that we interact with in our daily lives. So Paul has this role of missionary to the world, preaching Jesus, speaking to crowds, planting churches, the big stuff too. But then he's like, but you have a role. You have a role in a Christian in the spheres of influence you have, in the people that you interact with, in your schools, at your place of work, with family members, with friends. Because the mission is about you growing in Jesus. And one of the primary ways you grow is that you're a light to others, that you're salt to others, that you live in the grace of Jesus, you embody it, and you share it with other people. Evangelism and discipleship. That's the strategy. These are like two wings of an airplane. How many of you fly? How many of you have ever flown on a plane before? How many of you fly? Most of you that are here? I have a neighbor next door to me, great guy. His family, they'll go down to Florida for vacation. They recently went to Alaska. He will not fly in an airplane. So he drives like hours and hours and hours in the car because he won't fly. But most of you, you fly in airplanes. It's very safe, it works. However, if you were to get to the airport and you were to come to find out that your plane that you're about to get on only has one wing on it, how many of you would go on that flight? Let's say it's an Allegiant airline or something like that. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, Allegiant. Like we couldn't afford the other wing. You got to pay for the other wing if you want the other wing to be on here, right? Nobody's going on that flight because you might not know a lot about aerodynamics and how airplanes work, but it's got to have two wings if this thing is getting off the ground and is going to land safely. We've got to have both of those wings. And the two wings of the church's strategy are evangelism and discipleship. We have to have both of those things. You see this from one other passage that Sean showed us last week. It's Matthew chapter 28, the Great Commission, right? These are Jesus' final words before he's about to ascend back up into heaven, and he leaves his followers with a charge. Now, when you think broadly about the Great Commission, you're like, oh, this has got to be a more passage. Jesus wants more followers because it's a small group following him. He's going to build his church, and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. So this is probably like evangelism passage, build the church, right? But no, it's both of those things. Notice what Jesus says to his followers before he's about to leave. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And he gives them this promise because the context right before this says that they gathered to Jesus on this mountainside, and they didn't exactly know that he was going to ascend back up into heaven, but they were scared. Some of them were. Because it says they came, they gathered, but some of them doubted, which should be of great encouragement to you. That Jesus' first followers, who had seen him crucified on a cross and then rise from death in his resurrected body and appear to them, and at times in those 40 days when he met with them, disappear out of their sight, doing miraculous things like that. When they gathered to Jesus after he resurrected from the grave, they're like, I'm still not sure about this thing. I'm still a little bit scared. I still have questions. I still have doubts. And so Jesus, instead of saying, you're out of the discipleship group, right? What does he say to them? He says, no, listen to me. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. You saw me resurrect from the grave. I have all power. I can do whatever I want to do, and I'm giving you that power. So on the basis not of your wits, and the basis of your great knowledge and your great strength, or rather in spite of your fears and your doubts that you have, I have all authority. And on the basis of my authority, I want you to go and make disciples of all the nations, of all people groups, and do it this way. Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And one more promise, I'm with you always. I'll be with you to the very end of the age. Which actually, maybe surprising to you, is actually a word for you. Have you ever thought about Jesus talking to these disciples and saying to them, I'm with you always to the very end of the age, when those disciples were not going to be around to the end of the age? Who might Jesus be talking to when he says to his people, I'm with you to the very end of the age? Do you know that's a promise to you? That's a promise to me, because those disciples all basically died out within the first century, but the church continues, and the promise of Jesus' power and presence continues in you and me. We're a part of this thing, this is his mission, right? We're a part of what he's doing. And the mission that Jesus has for us to make disciples of all the nations, that is a more thing, but it's also a go deeper thing. It's an evangelism and discipleship thing, indicated by those two words, baptize and teach. The baptism to us indicates that we've got to go out and share the gospel message with people so that people will say, yes, I believe in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and I'm going to be baptized to show my identification with him, that is what I'm believing and hoping in for my life and for my salvation. So baptism there indicates evangelism is taking place. And then Jesus doesn't say, and then leave them. Baptize them and they're good to go. They'll make it to heaven. We're all set. What does he say? And then teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. The breadth, the depth of what I've taught you, pass on to them. And then this, Jesus doesn't say, teach them to know all the stuff that I downloaded to you. There has to be a download, there has to be some knowledge, there has to be some information, but what does Jesus clearly say? Teach them to obey. Teach them to receive, to embody my grace and truth, not just so they can recite it and say they know chapter and verse, but so that they would live it out in their lives, that it would be who they are, that it would come out in the way that they treat other people. We teach people to obey, to actually follow Jesus. And so the Great Commission itself it's evangelism and discipleship. It's external and internal growth. It's numerical and spiritual growth. It is more followers and mature followers of Jesus Christ. And so our strategy for engaging with Jesus' mission, it has to include these two things. When we focus on only one part of this, either evangelism or discipleship, problems ensue. Great problems result from that. It's like a one-winged ministry, to go back to our plane illustration, and it will crash and burn. It will. It's extremely unhealthy. Maybe some of you have been in a place before you've seen this with a church that's only all about discipleship or only all about evangelism. Like it's one or the other, and we really don't emphasize both of those things. In a church that's maybe only all about discipleship, the rhetoric might go like this, it might look like this. This church is really for deep Christians. This is for serious followers of Jesus. This is for people that take their faith seriously. They're really devoted. We're really fighting against sin. We really want to do it the right way, which happens to be this program that we're running. And you subscribing to all these things that we believe and doing this program and looking like this and acting like this. And if it gets too big, well, then we probably got to weed some people out because they're probably not serious followers of Jesus, right? So it's like us four, no more, shut the door. And like we're just sort of happy with us. We do it the right way. And eventually within a culture that is only about discipleship, they become very much about themselves and their program, and it tends to become judgmental. And you either subtly or not so subtly look down on every other Christian, every other church because they don't do it the right way. They're not really serious. They're fake. They're seeker Christians, right? They're not really serious about following Jesus like we are. And then the judgmentalism and the Phariseeism weeds its way in. And eventually places like that, in the extreme cases, they actually become a cult because they just become all about themselves and the way that they do it. And subtly over time, it becomes more about their program than even about what Jesus himself has said and looking a certain way. This kind of church is typically very unhealthy because, you know why? Healthy things reproduce. It's biology. Healthy things grow. Healthy things reproduce. Healthy things build an ever-expanding family, right? And when you're in an only discipleship place, it just tends to be about the few people that kind of make this up and do it our exact way. On the other hand, a church that's only about evangelism can tend to make this mistake. They're more about numbers than people. And you, as a follower of Jesus and part of this church, you're only as profitable to me as the people that you bring into the church, right? And so they have a tendency to just use you to make the flock bigger and better. And sometimes it becomes all about a charismatic leader and his brand and building up his thing so that he looks good and he can feel good about this big thing that we've been able to build. It just becomes about numbers instead of about people. People are used to build up the numbers, but not necessarily cared for or developed. Spiritual growth is back burner, so there tends to be no depth and genuine discipleship there. See, instead, a healthy church pursues both evangelism and discipleship. There's a balance and a synergy and a wholeness that is there. Two wings, so that the plane can fly, can get off the ground, can excel and do well. Or we could go back to biology again. Healthy things grow, and healthy things reproduce. And not to get all 8th grade health class on you, but in order to be at the point of reproduction, you have to mature a little bit to be able to reproduce. But as you mature, as an organism matures, it's built into them to reproduce. It's natural. It's the way the world was made. And you know what this church is that we're doing? This thing that we're doing? This church is not primarily an institution. It is not first and foremost an organization, though we need some organization to make things happen, but that's not really what we are. What is the church? The church is the body of Jesus Christ. It's a living organism. It's biology. A church, the body of Jesus Christ, that when healthy grows. It grows spiritually and numerically. Evangelism and discipleship. So with God's word driving our strategy, then what does that specifically look like for NorthPoint? And I just want to walk through this with you to give you a sense of, how do I grow as a disciple of Jesus here? What is the strategy for that? What does that actually look like? And I think some of this you know, but I don't know that we've ever just totally laid it out there for you and said, hey, here's what we're as leaders hoping for. This is what we're expecting, and just making it clear to you. So let me try to make that clear to you here. Our mission is cultivating communities of grace and truth. And you can see in just our simple, 6-word mission statement, both evangelism and discipleship are in there. Cultivating, developing, growing communities, more than just one, numbers, more followers of Jesus, filled with the grace and the truth of Jesus, right? You see both of those things there. Through these values, looking to Jesus, embracing community, and engaging our culture. Evangelism and discipleship are both there. So what's the strategy for doing this? And it very simply looks like this. How do we look to Jesus? What are our hopes for you and what we're asking you to be a part of? When it comes to looking to Jesus, we're asking you to be here in corporate worship. We're a called out gathering of God's people, hearing from his word, singing to him, looking to him, casting vision about what he has for us, but keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus as we corporately gather together as his body here, and then growing in spiritual practices. So you notice if you're here at NorthPoint for a period of time that one of the primary things we're always coming back to and trying to help you with is, how do you grow in prayer? How do you grow in talking to Jesus? How do you value his word and open this up on a regular basis to hear from him and see what he has to say? And we do this through here, but we also do it through resources we give you and through small groups and Bible studies and things like that to help you get in his word and learn how to pray and develop spiritual practices with him. So there's lots of ways that we look to Jesus, and we try to do this in everything, but the two primary ways are Sunday services and helping you to develop spiritual practices. What about embracing community? What's our strategy for that? Well, that would be groups and serving. We're trying to present to you opportunities to say you need relationships, and we need you to take a step beyond just Sunday morning services, which is really good, but that's not enough. You need to develop Christian friendships to help you grow in your faith, to mature in your faith in Jesus. And so, hey, here's a Bible study starting, and here's a community group, and here's a discipleship group, and here's kids ministry, and here's men's ministry, and here's student ministry, and here's women's ministry, and there's opportunities for you to get in relationships with other followers of Jesus. And then we say to you, we want you to look at the gifts God's given you, and your time, and your resources, and your abilities, and serve. One of the primary ways you actually grow to get to know other people and other followers of Jesus is to serve with them on a serving team, and to serve others because you're part of a body, and the body needs you, and you need the body. And so you get in a group and you get serving. And then what about engaging our culture? For engaging our culture, our strategy is this, both local and global opportunities. So with global missions, we focused on that last week. This is the pray and give and get to know and support our global missionaries. Inform yourself, and so we try to do that. And then local opportunities include both projects within our community and also encouraging you and seeking to equip you with knowing what the gospel is and caring about your neighbors and coworkers and classmates and friends. and seeking to engage them with the love of Jesus, the grace of Jesus, and the truth of Jesus Christ. So, again, if you are here and you are a part of NorthPoint, this is what it means to be on mission with Jesus here. Engagement in each of these areas. That you're like, yeah, I'm here faithfully, and I'm learning from God's word, and I'm looking to him, and I'm worshiping him, and I'm seeking to develop that walk with him on a daily basis, and I'm engaged with some relationships in some kind of group, and I'm saying, God, what have you given me? I'm seeking to serve. I'm engaged in local and global missions in some way as well. Now, look, I know that when you look at these, there's a couple of caveats I have to give. Everybody's life circumstances are a little bit different. There's different life stages. Some of you also have limitations. And I don't want you, as we talk about the different opportunities we have, to think in your mind, oh, they're saying I got to do every group. I have to do every local project. I have to get involved in every single thing. I've said this to you before. One of our emphases as a church is foster care and adoption. And just hear me clearly. Some of you should not foster adopt. If you came to me and said, I'm thinking about foster, I'd be like, I don't think God wants that for you, right? I'm not afraid to say that because some of you should not absolutely do that. It would not be good for you or the kids, right? And so we're not saying you have to do everything, but you can support our foster care and adoptive families and pray for them and maybe financially support and encourage and come alongside of them. So it might be that. But there might be another area of ministry that God has for you. So we're not trying to give you a list of, I've got to do all of these things and I'm a good Christian once I do all the things that the church is presenting to us. No, it's you with God saying, God, what do you have for me? Am I involved in looking to Jesus, embracing community, and engaging my culture? What does that look like for me? What does that look like for our family? The last thing I want for anybody is to give you a to-do list. You know this. We are not trying to give you a checklist that I'm spiritual and I'm mature if I do all of these things. But God does have things for you to do at the same time, right? He has given you gifts and abilities and called you into his mission. And this is what we're asking you to be involved in as God leads you in those ways. What this is about for us is seeking to have a unified strategy, unified engagement with the mission and the values that Jesus has called us to. And so I just give you a little bit of encouragement here. You know, if you look at these things and you're like, you know, Jeremy, yeah, I believe in Jesus. I follow him. I say NorthPoint is my church. But you only sit in Sunday services, I'm glad that you're here. Or you only watch online services, I'm glad that you're doing that. But it's probably time for you to take a step forward in Jesus' mission, to look at the rest of this and say, okay, like we need to take a step into relationships. We need to take a step into not just receiving and taking from the church, but giving and being a part of the mission that God's called us to here. And we want to get excited about that, and we want to take a step towards that, both here and in our local community. Because Jesus has called you. He's given you life. He loves you. And you'll fully come to know who he is and what he has for you when you fully embrace his mission and yield yourself to what he is doing. Now, to push this strategy just a little bit further, I want to share with you today 2 initiatives that our leaders have been led to focus on for 2023. And so if we've talked kind of mission and calling, our specific mission, that is our strategy, I want to talk to you about 2 strategic initiatives for 2023. And one has to do with discipleship and one has to do with evangelism. The first one with discipleship is this, that we've been working on for a little while, is something called a discipleship pathway, or our discipleship pathway. And what this project is basically saying to you, if you're here and you're part of NorthPoint, how do I grow? What are the steps that I'm supposed to take? What am I being asked to do? And what are the paths towards growing in different seasons of my life, in different stages of my life? And what are basic things that Christians need to grow and learn and live in and live out? And so what we've been working on, and we're getting closer to unveiling this, is something that is very clear and that is also visual. I like visuals. What does this look like? How can I see myself on this path, and what do I need next? And so it's a discipleship pathway that says to you, hey, here's what I'm going through in my life. Are there resources for me in this way? Or I just need to grow in this area of my life. What's the opportunity to be able to do that? And so our discipleship pathway will include everything from the groups that we offer, to Bible studies that we offer, to classes that we offer, to different curriculum things, to support groups that we have, to maybe help on parenting and your marriage, maybe counseling resources as well. There's some things we want to develop a little further on sexuality. Anybody living in a world right now that is struggling with sexuality and gender issues? Do we need a word from God on please help me with figuring this out? If you don't as an adult, your kids do, for sure. And so this is a thing where we step back and we say, okay, what are we offering on that? How are we training and teaching and growing people in the grace and truth of Jesus on those areas? On sexuality, on being able to share our faith and what it looks like living in this world that we live in today. This discipleship pathway is also something for us as leaders that's allowing us to address gaps. Like there are things that we don't do well yet. There's things that as a church we need to learn and that we need to lean into. And the discipleship pathway helps us to say, where are those gaps? What do we need to add to this? How do we need to help to continue to equip and to train and to grow people? And so that's what the discipleship pathway is. Our hope as well with this, whether we call it discipleship pathway or not, will be that we would do the same thing for our kids and for our teenagers. How do they live as a follower of Jesus in this world? How do we need to equip them very strategically from birth to high school graduation and on into college? What should that look like? How do we need to be training and growing and developing them? And so this discipleship pathway is just one more way for us to try to be strategic with cultivating communities of grace and truth by looking to Jesus, embracing community, and engaging our culture. That's our discipleship initiative. The advance plan then, secondly, is our evangelism initiative. If you remember back in the first message in this series, I shared with you some words that our leaders have felt encapsulate the last few years at NorthPoint and in the world in which we live. And the words that I shared with you were from 2020 to 22. The two words were endure. This was pandemic time. COVID, online church, masks, no mask, regulations, no regulations. Like, what world are we living in? How do we move forward? What does all of that look like? And it was a season of us saying, cling to Jesus, look to Jesus, rest in Jesus, hope in Jesus, and Jesus, please help us to know what we're supposed to do, right? And it's sensed that what Jesus said is endure, keep looking to me, and just love people. Care for people and love people and walk with them through this, and we'll give you some more direction in the future. Keep looking to me and love people, and we'll take care of it, right? And so for about 3 years, that's what we did as a church. I think that's what we were supposed to do. Coming into 2023, I don't know that we're through the pandemic. I don't know if there will be another pandemic. I don't know. But I sense that Jesus has been saying to us, it's time to move forward. It's time to advance. It's time to get after it. This is Paul's Colossians 1 and verse 29. When he gets done explaining the mission of Jesus, you know what he says? To this end, I strenuously contend with all the energy Christ so powerfully works. I've given my entire life to hardcore going after and pursuing the mission of Jesus Christ. I want to advance. And that's the word that God has for us. As NorthPoint, it's time to advance and to move forward. And so let me set it up this way. I occasionally will get a question from people, from you, that goes something like this. You'll say, hey, Jeremy, it seems like things are going pretty well, and the church is growing, and we have all this green space. Like, are there any plans for that? Like, what are we going to do? What's the vision for the future? What's going to happen there? Well, I'm glad you asked me that question this morning, because I want to answer that for you. But I got to give you a little bit of history first. So back in 2018, we did a significant remodel of this building. It was a $1.6 million project. We had a number of things in the building that after being 20 years here needed updating and upgrading, right? So we needed to do that. We also expanded our student center. We remodeled our foyer. We put on a kids' entrance on the south side of our building, and we did a big remodel on the worship center. We invested quite a bit in technology, which by God's foresight and great design was very helpful when the pandemic came, because we were set up pretty well to be able to do online services and all those things. But when we did that remodel, we did it without doing a capital campaign. And we did a kind of a soft push for money, but we largely borrowed that money because in our minds, what we were intending to do is that wrapped up is to initiate a community center project on our green space. And to say, we'll probably do a big capital campaign, we're going to build a community center. That's how we feel God's leading us. But as we were wrapping up the remodel and getting ready to do that, I just sensed that we needed to act more like a community center before we built a building. And instead of having the, if we build it, they will come mentality, and the community center making us something that wasn't quite yet in our DNA, I don't know, it just didn't make sense to me. And I thought, we got to act like a community center and love our community more and do more community efforts and see if it makes sense to do something with the green space. And so that's what we've done over the last few years, is we've tried to establish local partnerships and provide more projects and opportunities and to try to get into our DNA as a church the idea of loving our community, developing partnerships, engaging at your place of work and at your schools, and just continuing to grow these community efforts. And so we began talking with you about refugees and continue to talk to you about foster care and adoption, and about tutoring needs, and about school partnerships, and other areas. We hired Sarah Emerson as our local partner coordinator to help us develop these opportunities and kind of grow the culture and the DNA of the church. And it's kind of cool a few years later now to look back as we feel like God's pushing us to advance and to look at this space that we have to say, hey, like, is it in our culture now? Do we love our community? Are we loving our community well? And what does that look like? And I just want to share some of those things with you about what God has led us into. Here are the local ministries over the last few years that God's allowed us to be a part of. Blood drives, we actually had one just this past week. We host those with LifeServe here at the church. The study table is a tutoring program for Congolese students at Johnston High School that meet here, about 30 plus students on Monday nights. Lots of different maybe community organizations, businesses use our facilities now if they need it. We have an adult English language class that we've recently started. We've done a number of work projects, maybe, 15 to 20 work projects throughout the Des Moines metro area. Refugee resettlement's been a huge thing for us at NorthPoint. If you've been around, you've heard about this. We've had the opportunity the last couple of years to move in 6 refugee families into the Des Moines metro area, which means everything from meeting them at the airport to welcome them here for their first time on Iowan soil, to setting up apartments for them, to helping them be able to shop and get groceries and figure out transportation. Some of you have been in mentoring relationships with these refugee families to help get them established. So we've moved in 6 families. There's about another 3 to 6 families that we've partnered with to help them figure out how to navigate and do life here. In fact, one recent story that's super cool is that one of the refugee agencies called us and said, hey, we have some Afghan refugees that are actually Christians, which isn't normally the case, but they're Christians and they want to attend a church. So, like, we have a good partnership with you. You're a church. We thought this would be great for you. You know, maybe you could welcome into your church. Well, the family is going to be living up in Ankeny. And so we said, you know what? There's actually a church up in Ankeny that's trying to get started with refugee resettlement. We've been talking with them and trying to help them get started. And this family's up in Ankeny, so how about we give this family to them? And we were able to do that, to help another church get involved with refugee resettlement and give them this family that could more easily be incorporated into their church. So those kinds of relationships and things have been happening. Overtime happens after the Johnston home football games. We had our largest year of that, almost 600 students at overtime. Our kids in student ministry, our kids in our middle school is the largest numbers that we've ever had in those ministries. Our foster care and adoption continues to be something very important for us, supporting families in that way. Our deaf ministry, which are over here in second service, and I just got to tell them in first service that our deaf ministry is here in second service, but you may not know this, but we have one of the largest deaf ministries in the Des Moines metro area that's growing, and God is really blessing our deaf community. So could we give them a hand this morning and thank God for their participation in our church? And thank you. And God's been moving and working in that way. Our community care fund. These are funds that we give to people in our church and in the community with financial needs. And this last year, we were able to give the largest amount ever. About $75,000 went out to needs within our community, in our church, and in our community as well. And then the Give Initiative, the last thing I'll mention this morning, the Give Initiative is our giving during the month of December, like outside of ourselves, to these kinds of local ministries. We had 6 things this year that we were giving to, and we asked you if you would give $75,000 to support these ministries. You know what you gave? You gave $180,000 towards these local ministries. Yeah, we could clap for that. Because it just says, you're like, yes, these are important. We want to be a part of this, and we're willing to give towards these things. If I would share with you our local partnerships, I'll do this pretty quickly, but these are all the partnerships we have with community organizations in this. Johnston Schools, the Johnston Partnership, Agape Pregnancy Center, the Star Clinic, Beauty Amidst the Ashes and Together for the Good are adoption organizations, Meals from the Heartland. There's 4 Iowa refugee agencies, Hope Ministries, and then Greenbelt Community Church is a church that we help to get going as a church plant in Clive. And that's so encouraging. Now, when I look at those and you just put them down and you put them on paper, I'm like, hey, I think maybe we're doing this, like engaging culture thing. I think we've made progress and made steps. And for me in the last month, it was a little bit of a surprise because there's lots of things that I'm involved with here. This is a big part of what I do, but it's like there's other staff members that really initiate these and push these forward. And when you get them down on paper, you're like, hey, remember we said we were going to do this. I kind of forgot we said we were going to do this because the pandemic wipes your memory out and you don't know what happened during that, right? Like I don't even know what timing. Like people are like, what did you do in 22? I don't know what timing is anymore, right? But you look back now, you're like, God, thank you. You're moving, you're working in these ways. But I want to add one more thing to this that's really important. it came from a couple conversations I had with people over the last couple months. And I realized in having conversations with people that there are a number of community organizations and nonprofits that you are involved with outside of what we specifically focus on as a church. And so I thought in my mind, I'd really love to know how many other things our people are involved in. So back in early January, we did a contact update, like update your contact information. You remember that? We ask you to scan a digital code and to input updated information. And on that, we asked you one question. And the question we asked you was this: what charities or organizations are you or your spouse involved with outside of NorthPoint? And as you answered that question, and I didn't include in this number that I'm going to give you for how many organizations there are, I didn't include Hope Ministries and Agape Pregnancy Center, and that a number of you are involved in those places and other things that I already put up there. You know how many organizations you're involved with outside of NorthPoint's focus? 60. 60 other community organizations that you have either started, that you lead, that you serve on, that you give to, that you support. And I look at that and I'm like, let's go, NorthPoint. This is it. Because I think in part what it's doing, it's getting at that these aren't just programs that we're doing. We're seeking to live in the grace and truth of Jesus. We embody that so it comes out in everything we are and everything we do. And you don't always have to have a church program, right? To share the love of Jesus, to share the grace of Jesus where you live. We're doing it. When you combine the local ministries that we have, with the local partners that we form, with the ministries that you're a part of that aren't a part of our strategic focus, and you add to that your coworkers and your classmates and your neighbors and your family members, the people are there. The opportunities are in front of us. It is there for us to get after it and get going with this. And it makes me so excited to see God move and work in this way. It makes me excited that I think there's just a couple of things I think that we need to advance this more, to move this forward. And the two things are this. First of all, we need to grow and continue to grow in knowing, living, and articulating the gospel. All these good deeds, all this good work, all these relationships, absolutely necessary. It's a part of the gospel. It's a part of what God calls us to. But you know, the gospel of Jesus Christ is good news. And news has to be shared. It has to be verbalized for people. And I think as followers of Jesus, we have the networks, we have the relationships, we're doing a lot of those things. And it can be a call to get more involved in those things for sure, but we have a lot of those things taking place. I think as a body, we need to grow in what is the gospel? How do I have that conversation? How do I move people to help see their need of Jesus Christ and take this goodwill that I have with people and help them come to know the life-changing grace of Jesus Christ? And so I think in 2023, we need some more work on that. What is the gospel? How do I share it? How do I take this relationship to the next step with these individuals that I've built goodwill with? We want to see more of that take place in 2023. And the second thing I think that we need is when we look at all the growth that God has done and how he's working, I sense it is time for us to look at our green space and say, okay, God, what do you want us to do with this resource that you have for us? I think we're a church that now has this in our DNA of loving our community. And we've got some space constraints here in our current building, so maybe it's time to expand this ministry and this reach. And I don't know exactly what that will be. Will it be a community center? Maybe. Will it have to do with playgrounds and fields? Maybe. Will it have to do with counseling and providing counseling resources? Maybe that. It'll definitely be an in and out on that corner. I know that for sure. We're talking with corporate offices and trying to, no. Kidding. Maybe a Freddy's actually would be good. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe. But maybe a food option right there, right? To gather, to do life with people, to engage with people in the real kind of spaces that we live. I'm not sure exactly what it will be. We'll talk about it a little bit more at our annual meeting that you're invited to after this if you want to hear a little more about it. But ultimately right now, I just hope it excites you to say that you're a part of this and God's moving and he's working, and together to say, all right, am I fully engaged with looking to Jesus, embracing community, and engaging culture? Am I on board with this? And then would you pray that God would give wisdom and direction and vision for exactly what he wants us to do, both with the discipleship pathway so we can go deeper in our relationship with Jesus, and in this advanced plan so that we can continue to push forward in reaching our community with the love and the message of Jesus Christ. Let me finish up with this. Our community care fund, as I mentioned earlier, it helps a lot of people that are in need. both in our church and in our community. We have a team of 4 people that vet all the requests that we get out, and there's some weeks where the requests just roll, man. There's not a lot of churches that really do this anymore. A lot of times they refer to other organizations, but we've had a heart for continuing to do this. And we've got a great team of people that looks at each of those and tries to really help people, help them without hurting them. Sometimes the individuals that we help, they'll accept the Bible. Sometimes they allow us to pray for them. Very occasionally, they'll visit the church. A lot of people say, yes, I'm going to come to church, I want to come to church, and that doesn't often happen, but sometimes it does. And then very occasionally, we get a note back from people thanking us for the way that we have helped them. One person that we helped this last year was a single lady that had a friend that was in prison. And this lady that was in prison was a pregnant mom about to give birth to a baby. And her friend, who was out of prison, was like, I don't want that baby to go in the foster care system. So she exhausted all of her finances through legal means to try to be able to adopt and to bring this baby into her home. And she just had no financial means. So we came alongside of her and we helped provide for some legal fees and some financial help for her, in addition to scouring the Des Moines metro area for formula. This was back when we had the formula shortage, right? And so Grant Goodnow, who's our care minister here at the church, is literally driving around the Des Moines metro to different stores trying to find the specific formula that this baby needs. And so this is the kind of things that people here do to care for needs in our community. Well, this woman, after we had helped her in a number of months, I think, wrote a note to us towards the end of the year. And this is what her note said. Thank you so much for all of your help and the above and beyond thoughts of us. I never would have gotten on the right and doable financial path without you all. So very thankful and grateful for all of you and all you've done for us. We are both doing very well. The little girl will be 1 year old on January the 8th of this year. You all show the good that is still out there. Thank you. Very gratefully yours. Now look, I am not sure if this woman has believed in Jesus yet, but you can pray that she would. You know she has seen the love of Jesus, the grace of Jesus. She knows where the truth is to be found, and she certainly has goodwill in her hearts towards NorthPoint. We want that to translate into goodwill towards Jesus and trusting in him, and her life being absolutely transformed by him. Look, this is Jesus' mission, and it's what you and I get to be a part of. So NorthPoint, let's go. Let's advance. Let's work hard with all the energy that Christ so powerfully works within us. Let's take the next step in that. Would you pray with me?